Welcome to Liquid, How CFOs Outperform. I'm your host, Tom Gavaghan. Today on Liquid, we're talking to someone who's seen the CFO role from just about every angle. David Smith, welcome. He is the CFO of RevSpring, and his path here is what makes his perspective, I think, so valuable for our show here today. Started in private equity and private credit. Then he became a CEO where he hired CFOs and managed those. And now he is the CFO back in the CFO seat himself. He's navigated corporate crises, built discipline into the organizations that have lacked it, and has a philosophy that's pretty uncommon, that CFOs don't just work for the CEO. They work for every business leader in the company. So thank you for joining us, and really looking forward to the conversation here today. I'd love to start just by saying, bring that experience to light here. What's that 360-degree view that you have that has changed the way you kind of manage the CFO seat today?
No, it's very interesting. I think it's giving me a perspective on the difference in perspectives that different stakeholders bring from the CFO seat, right? So as an investor, investors are really focused on value creation. How is the company going to achieve a maximum exit value for the investors, right? So having been an investor and understanding what they look at and what are those drivers and what levers they like to pull gives me a perspective of how to translate that into the business as a CFO. And then being in the CEO seat has given me a really appreciation for the speed and clarity needed as a leader of the organization, right? Perfection, it might be something that people aspire to, but it can definitely slow down organizations. And then from the CFO role, it's given me the ability to take those perspectives from the CEO and the investors and translate into operations. And that's, as you talk about, to do that, you really have to partner with business leaders throughout the organization, from HR to legal to the operations in particular.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I want to come back to a little bit more of the function on the CFO and your perspective on it. But before we get into it, in relation to RevSpring and the company there that you're a part of, help us understand exactly what you guys have been doing, the journey that RevSpring has been on as well.
I've been with RevSpring a little bit more than a year now, and it's really an exciting venture. We've just closed our first acquisition since I've been in the seat, and we had new investors that came in March of 2024. What I would say is RevSpring is a leader in patient engagement. We started Legacy as a print business, and today we print probably 30% of all patient statements in the country. And we've evolved today to sort of wrap the print product with a lot of digital and payment technology so that we help healthcare providers collect on their patient receivables. And I'm sure your audience realizes and appreciates how the financial responsibility of patients is increasing with high deductible plans and such. And so what we do helps healthcare providers improve cash flow, right? Because we can help speed the time for them to collect from their patient. And we do it in a way that engages the patients and delivers an exceptional experience. And I'm really proud of the accomplishments this company has delivered to our clients.
That's great. Very interesting. I think dynamic, the old world into the new world, and the balance, I guess, that still exists there. And we'll see, I guess, the mail-ins, go down and the more electronic stuff go up. And RevSpring obviously is really the power behind that. When we were talking before the show, you had said something I think a bit provocative, which is you learn more about a company as a CFO than any other C-level role. What do you consider your greatest advantage in your seat in innovating finance and liquidity, given this unique perspective that you are able to bring?
There's an analogy I use quite often when I'm talking with folks, and it's top of the pyramid. If you're at the top of the pyramid, you literally do have a 360-degree view. And if you think about the sides of the pyramids of being maybe different functional areas, right? If you're in HR or sales and marketing or operations, you really don't see that same perspective because you're all really focused on the tactical objectives and strategic priorities for your function. But as a CFO, you see the whole picture. And I think that's helpful to be able to connect all the different components from operations to sales and marketing to HR. And I find that helps me to do my job better, right? If I was purely focused on closing the books and telling the management team how we did relative to some benchmark or forecast, that would really just be table stakes. I think where a good CFO really excels is being able to connect the dots so that everyone understands how when something happens in one part of the business, the consequences in other parts of the business. And that's what I really enjoy about the role that I play.
Super interesting. I think, again, one of the unique things you bring is that you've kind of been on both sides of private equity, kind of from the portco level and being owned in private equity, but also on the other side. First, let's start, like, the background experience you had at when you were within private equity in the CLO space, kind of walk the audience through kind of that business model, right, of credit strapped in companies and kind of moving them from credit to equity kind of holding
Yeah,
levels.
I worked with a company called Highland Capital Management that was primarily a CLO shop, a collateralized loan obligation. So we managed big portfolios of loans, syndicated loans, in numbers of companies, both public and private. And the private equity practice grew out of the fact that sometimes private companies don't meet their obligations. And rather than losing value in a bankruptcy setting or an out of court restructuring, Highland decided to build a private equity capacity to basically take control of businesses through a restructuring. So all the companies that I managed were companies that we acquired through either in court or out of court restructurings. And the unique thing is that, for the most part, not every case, but for the most part, we controlled the entire capital stack. So we converted some of our debt to equity. So we owned 100% of the equity, and we still had affiliated loans controlling the debt side. And really, it was two sides of the shop, arm's length throughout the case. But when you're in a turnaround situation, you need creditors to be understanding and patient. And that's what I think it gave us. So it was a really unique opportunity to focus on operations and be less focused on trying to manage the capital structure. Because I think companies that come out of a restructuring are still having some of their legacy challenges. They fix the balance sheet for the most part, but oftentimes they still are probably a bit over levered because no one really wants to give up that secured priority position as a creditor. So they're probably over levered, and they're still focused on just driving a lot of cash flow, which may be good for the short term, but not necessarily long term. And so I think at Highland, we had a good balance between meeting our credit obligations, but also building the business to achieve long-term strategic objectives. And that's what I enjoyed about being in that particular position. And it created an opportunity when there was a turnover in one of the portfolio companies for me to come in as the CEO. And that's where I'd been on the board, and so I really knew the business, but then I had a chance to come in and drive the results. And we regrew the business to over $300 million through, several different acquisitions. And it was a great opportunity to move from being somebody sitting behind the scenes to somebody who was working side by side with hospital CEOs and CNOs across the organization. And I really enjoyed the role, and we had a lot of great people in that organization. And I still think very fondly about that experience.
And so that's a success story coming out of that. I don't know. I'm guessing there wasn't 100% success in those types of restructurings that you went through. So can you share kind of what worked for you in that company, right? Which took something that was kind of a little bit strapped and kind of rebuilt it, and others that maybe you tried that for and then they ended up back where they were in the first place.
I think in that particular situation, the focus was, it was a good business. It was already, we already kind of executed a lot of the turnaround. So it was a profitable business, but it was building the culture and creating the discipline around execution, process orientation, so that we could scale the business. So I think that was an element of the success there, was the alignment of culture, engaging the employees, and then supporting it with good process, right? And we had good leaders, right? And making sure that we had good leaders from the corporate level down into the hospitals. And we spent a lot of time on leadership development. And while I was there, for example, we promoted a number of CNOs, right, who really knew the product. We were working in specialty hospitals. We put them through leadership development training. We were able to promote them to CEOs. So we had the benefit of people who understood the business from the bedside, but now they also understood it from the financial side. And I think that was an element of its success. Fortunately, I've been in situations that turned around into a bankruptcy, right? Go into a situation where a business is over levered, and we really tried to focus on execution, but ultimately we had to file for bankruptcy. And that was really a situation where the business was over levered, and we were in a marketplace where they were facing lots of headwinds. It was a provider of services into the skilled nursing space. And anybody who knows anything about skilled nursing knows that segment of the healthcare has been really challenged here over the last 10 years. Well, this business went through a bankruptcy, and through 6 months of hard work and some really great work from our advisors, we came out as an operational business after 6 months. And so that was a success. It wasn't a success when you think about it from our equity investors, but it was a success that the employees, kept their jobs, and we continued to provide services to our client base. And I think that was success in that situation was a really, really strong focus on cash flow, right? When you're in a bankruptcy, cash is king. And we were very much focused on managing cash, managing expenses, and making the hard decisions. If you think, Tom, about companies that don't come out of a restructuring environment well, they defer making the tough decisions, right? And it's tough to restructure, eliminate business, raise prices where necessary. That would be my advice to folks ever facing a restructuring situation: is make the tough decisions early and stay the course.
And stay the course. And I think what you were saying earlier, you were talking about in those types of restructuring, it's about putting the right people in the right places. It's about putting the right processes in. So we can boil that down to discipline, which we've talked about. For our treasury friends that are listening, let's talk about forecasting. And everybody's ears are probably perking up here because everybody loves to talk about forecasting. I think some will feel better knowing that. I think you've come across and worked, seen organizations that don't even, or not even possible to create a 13-week forecast, for example. So can you talk through like building that discipline and forecasting rigor in the organization? How does the team manage the plan and optimize liquidity?
Definitely. Yeah, I think having a 13-week cash flow is important no matter where you stand. My current business, we have a lot of cash, but we still do a 13-week cash flow, right? And we manage the business like we don't have the cash, because if you start managing the business and you lose the frugality, you can easily go sideways when things get tough, right? So it's maintaining that discipline in good times and in bad times, right? Having that 13-week cash flow is critical. Making sure that it's flexible so that you can adapt to changes in the business, changes in your capital structure, changes in the interest rate environment, and aligning with your strategy, right? So not just, for example, forecasting cash collections to be the same as we move forward. If the environment in your client base is deteriorating, they're probably not going to be paying at the same rate they've done historically. And if you forecast that, you're going to find yourself having a deficit in your forecast. And the reason that you want to do that forecast is so that you can start making changes and thinking about what needs to happen. Because the last thing you want as a private equity backed business, and certainly it applies in the public setting, but my experience has been in the private markets, you don't want to call your investor up and tell them you can't make payroll next week. Yeah. Right. And so if you know that you're going to have a challenge and you're at least 3 months out, that gives you a lot more runway to try to figure out different strategies to try to restructure, work with your creditors, whatever it may be, to make sure that you can meet your core business obligations.
Yeah. I read, it's either the beginning of this year or maybe the end of last year, I read the book Shoe Dog, which is Phil Knight's book, if you ever read it. But it's amazing, the Nike story, right? But he does go through and there's a specific situation where he didn't realize it. That his employees were not getting paid that Friday, and they were so strapped and had to go back to the bank and had to go and get the financing. And it's amazing to see that you can survive those types of things. But obviously discipline gets you there and sustains you.
Yeah, I'll tell Tom on that. Creditors, they don't want to operate your business, right? Creditors want to clip a coupon, the interest rate. That's what they want. Management teams who don't give them transparency, who aren't collaborative with their creditors, they force their hand, right? But if you've got 3 months, they can give you an interest rate holiday. They can capitalize the interest. There's things that they can do when they have time, because they also have to go through a process and manage that through their investment committees. But when you leave them no choice, they're going to have to take actions that are necessarily going to be adverse to the business.
Yep, absolutely. They have to do that's what they have to do at the end of the day. That's why they're in business. Let's go to your comment from earlier about, from your perspective, the CFO isn't just work for the CEO. They work for all the key business, leaders within the organization. So my first question on that is, how do you keep a balance though? Because with that type of mindset, do you not risk kind of potentially becoming suboptimal because you're getting pulled into too many directions and people are demanding too much of you and your team? How do you keep an operational balance there? I would love to hear your thoughts.
That can be a challenge. My approach is, I like to tell folks that I am their personal CFO, and it doesn't mean I'm going to be their personal financial advisor. Careful. But in the business setting, I want them to call me anytime, because I will make the time. So to be successful, you've got to have a good team, right? So fortunately, in my business, I don't have to worry about closing the books, because I've got a great team that I know closes the books on a timely basis with a high level of accuracy and integrity, right? So that's critical, right? Because if I'm having to spread my time on that, I certainly don't have time to take all those calls from the commercial side. And then I choose where I invest my time, right? Certainly the CEO calls, he's my first response, right? But beyond that, I spend a lot of time in this business working with the commercial side. That's the real driver of our business. Fortunately, we've got a fairly solid operations team, so we're not really focused on managing cost around the operations. They do a really good job on that. Where we can differentiate and drive values on the commercial side. And so from the CFO seat, that means being flexible on pricing, being flexible on payment terms, flexible on financial terms and contracts, where you don't want to necessarily delegate too much flexibility to a salesperson because they'll use it to potentially close a deal, and then we live with the consequences. But they partner. The salespeople, at least in my company, would tell you that they really appreciate that I push the thinking, and I'm always looking for ways to say yes. And I think that's a critical part of being a partner is you always want to bring the financial discipline, but you also want to look for ways to get to a yes, to get what the business is trying to do accomplished, but also maintain financial discipline.
Is that ingrained in you, that philosophy, or was that learned? And what I mean is sometimes, and especially as you get higher up, your first instinct or the first words out of your mouth is the easiest to say is no. And sometimes you have to bite your tongue because you do want to find a yes, but how do you kind of circumvent that if that is your mentality, or maybe that creeps in sometimes, which is just, you want to say no, but let's figure out a way to get there.
I think it's an appreciation probably from having been in the CEO role, and certainly the philosophy of the CEO that I serve today and I work with. We're in business to do business. That is where it comes down to. If you live with that mentality, okay, then you just naturally look for ways to get to yes. You look to ways to grow the business and make sure that everyone understands what risks we might be taking, but we manage the risks. We don't let the risks become an obstacle. I do think it's part of my philosophy, and it probably just comes from all the different experiences I've had, starting in public accounting, working in a management consulting environment like Bain, and working in private equity, and really understanding that at the end of the day, investors value cash flow. They value EBITDA, profitability, growth. And so those are all things that ultimately, if I help the business accomplish those things, then I'm doing my core job, which is to help grow the shareholder value.
Yeah, I completely agree. We had a leadership kind of meeting a couple weeks ago, and it's sometimes important to be reminded that people operate with the best intent as well, right? Like, so while
right.
you might not agree with what they're trying to do, understand that they are trying to do what's in the best intent. And if you can come back to that, then that opens up the mind to perhaps going and working together on that yes, finding an opportunity for yes there. How do you motivate your team? Like, so you're keeping that open communication, keeping that open dialogue, being partners with the rest of the organization, not just directly with your CEO. It opens up a lot of opportunities. Like we said, it could open up distractions, but it's all rooted in kind of learning and understanding so that you can help the business ultimately. How do you keep your team motivated to keep that mindset that you have and not, just living inside of their financial vertical?
I think it starts with making them feel empowered, right? And making them feel accountable to help drive value, finding ways to delegate and then partner, right? So a lot of the work that comes onto my plate, I could probably do myself, but I look for ways to delegate that to the team. And then I partner with them so I can coach them through things and give them a sounding board to think about it, right? And, what I've had people tell me as they work with me, and even this week, I had a couple of conversations with a couple of salespeople on a deal structure, and they were like, yeah, we were channeling my inner David, right?
Yeah.
And you start to get people thinking like you think, and it doesn't mean I'm the right person, but it's my perspective, I think is built on over 25 years of experience. That's, I think, a sense of accomplishment. When people, before you even have to tell them how to approach things, they're approaching it in a way that's very similar, maybe a little different, but very similar to how I might approach it, and giving them the ability to make decisions on their own, right? I don't try to control every decision. I don't try to have every key part of our finance interactions with the business partners coming with me. I encourage them to go and have direct conversations with the operations, and they don't have to include me, right? Maybe afterwards I appreciate a debrief, but it's the feeling that I try to give them that I believe in them, that I believe that they can do it. And operations are typically starved, right? Most organizations, especially private equity, they're not overstaffed. They don't have their own financial analysts sitting ready to jump and do work for them. So they're oftentimes having to do work on their own, or we're trying to rely on finance, and finance teams run thin and lean. And so they don't always have the time. And so they want the engagement. They love the engagement because the finance professional brings a sense of analytical skills and a different perspective on the business than the operator. And so I think our operators are always very open armed to welcome finance people. And I would say to your audience, if you ever have a situation where you're wondering, can I step in? Step in until they say no. And if you do it with a constructive mindset where I'm here to help and truly bring assistance, and you're not an auditor, you're not trying to look over their shoulder to make sure they're making the right decisions, but you're really there to help them make better decisions faster with better information, they will welcome you with open arms.
They should. I guess maybe this is a extenuation of your response there, but There are people maybe listening that, live in an organization. They think about what you're saying and they go, gosh, I wish that was me. I wish we worked in an organization like that. But we live in a very siloed one, right? It doesn't, we need to do and hit our goals as, finance leaders, even if it's at the expense of other parts of the organization, the marketing, the commercial team, whatever that might be. So is that your piece of advice that you would give to somebody listening that says, like, I want to make a cultural change? Because that's what you're talking about there. How is I as one person, how can I make that change? What are the little things I could do to help influence that change potentially if I'm sitting in the office of the CFO?
If you're from the CFO standpoint, right, it's setting those expectations that you want your finance team to be disciples. You want them to get out into the field and work with the operators hand in hand, okay? Then you probably want to have those conversations at the top level with your operators to make sure that they're going to be welcoming, because if it hasn't happened in the past, they may not necessarily expect it, nor know exactly what they're getting, right? They may be thinking you're sitting them in to audit their work, right? So you want to have those conversations with your peers to let them know what you're trying to accomplish. And then maybe the first couple of meetings, you have those meetings and you demonstrate the behaviors that you want, the questions that you're asking, right? And ideally, you're asking the question I always ask people: where's your point of pain? Where are you feeling challenged? And then you try to figure out, how can I help? And the problem that people can get into here is when you start asking to help, you have to follow through. You can't ask to be a helper, an assistant, and create more work for the other person. You've got to take on the work yourself, and then you do what you say you're going to do. One of my operating principles is integrity, and that's how I define integrity: is we do what we say we're going to do. And I think if you start off small, don't try to bite off a huge project, but something small. Almost every operator is going to have something that's on their plate. Maybe something that the CEO just asked them about this week that they don't have a good answer on. And you can help them get to that answer faster. It's going to make them look good in front of their boss. And it's going to start to build the sense of trust. And so I think it's a matter of just take the first step. But as a CFO, I'd lay the groundwork and I try to have some of those initial meetings so that your team knows how to break down those barriers that might exist in silos that exist in organizations.
I think it's a perfect answer. I would encourage that as well. My one addition to that would be realistic and celebrate the small things as well. You're looking for that cultural shift. Cultural shifts take time. Celebrate the incremental wins as you go along, the little things that you see and notice, and hopefully lead to, an environment that you ultimately foster.
Yeah. And I think what we'll find, if you do start to create that kind of culture, the results will follow, right? Businesses live on good decisions, live on good data. And if you open up the conduit for good data and good analysis and analytics from finance into the operations, I would be very surprised you're not going to see improved results and more sense of engagement between operations and finance. And for example, finance people hate to be surprised, right? If we miss a number, there's a reason. And probably somebody in the organization knew what was going to happen before you see it in your financial results. So by partnering with operations, you almost get to look ahead and anticipate things are going to happen because you open up the conduit for communication.
Absolutely. The results should absolutely follow. I'm going to ask you an abstract question here, and because I really would love your point of view on it. In the world right now, there's a lot of things happening, right? From a technology perspective, from a financial perspective, from an economic perspective, political perspective. There's a lot of things that are happening that ultimately somehow impact what we're doing in finance. What is the one thing that you would say that people need to be deeper knowledge on, more aware of, that's happening right now in the world?
Look, the easy answer is AI, right? I think that's one where finance organizations who aren't already using AI to help jumpstart their analysis are probably missing an opportunity. I mean, that's a really easy one. We are doing it in our organization across the board, looking for ways to complement our work with AI. It comes with some risks, right? You got to make sure that the source of the data that's being used, but we've used it a lot to do like market analysis, where getting data on the size of different markets is difficult. And what are those assumptions and how do you get that data? And it's helped us to speed, because oftentimes you don't need a precise answer to make a decision. You just need a materially correct answer. And that's where AI can complement the data analysis that one might have in a company. So that's, Tom, that's probably what I would say, is that that's not on your radar, not only within finance, but within the company in general. They're probably missing an opportunity. And data analysis comes with AI, right? And that's probably the second thing I would say for finance organizations is, are you using all the data in your organization to really drive value? Do you have the visibility to really understand how the different levers of your business move with different other consequences. And oftentimes organizations will have good P&L, good cash flow, good balance sheet. But when you start trying to look 2 or 3 levels down on the KPIs that drive those results, do they have that data? And so I think having that data will help them be able to make better decisions, connect the dots between different activities within the business. And AI can certainly be an assistant in that analysis.
I don't know if there was a right answer, but I think that was it. If there was one, all the other things, right, will evolve for sure, right? Wars will end or shift, and economic volatility will stop and then start. But the one thing that is going to be remaining for the rest of our lives is AI. I think your perspective on that is spot on. I also like the way you look at it, which is using it, especially in its current form, is directional, right? And getting me to a place where I can maybe take the last mile, perhaps, but doing some of that legwork. I think it's a great use case for it, actually, and it will evolve for more deeper precision. But for its current utilization, especially in the world of finance, where we're focused on decimal points, it absolutely helps you from a directional perspective. I do think, though, and this comes up in other conversations, as a CFO and as somebody who controls the income statement, the balance sheet, well, as your company's looking to invest there, the question ultimately is, well, how do we derive the value of it? And the easy thing that you always look at with value is, how much time are you saving? I don't think I am the believer that we cannot look at AI in that way. And the one thing that I had read or heard or somebody say is, it'd be like somebody saying back in whenever the late 90s, how much time is the internet saving you? Like, you
Right.
can't quantify that. And AI, I think, is the same way. It's about how much is it helping us coordinate, right? And how much of this is helping us make a decision faster. It's not actually the time, it's actually just getting to something and coordinating to something, I think, is the outlook there. But I would love your perspective. Are you sitting there with some sort of mathematical formula that you can derive an ROI on AI technology or AI investments? Because if you do, you could sell it.
No, you know what I think it's important is find appropriate use cases, right? AI is like a gun, and you need to have a target, right? So create a use case that if we accomplish what we're setting out to do, that will create value. And early on, it's a matter of, what do you have to believe, right? Because the data to support a good ROI calculation may not exist, but all you have to do is, if in order to justify this investment, this is what I have to believe is going to occur, do some small tests and see if the results are proving that out. That's how I think about it, is organizations that just AI is like a hammer and everything's a nail. That's probably not the right approach, right?
Love
The
it.
better approach is find some specific, tangible, ideally something with some strategic value where you can focus AI. And then that is where you're going to see a high value add, even if you have to kind of believe it's gonna happen on the come and you can't necessarily prove it in advance. If you allow yourself to be subject to just traditional ROI calculations, and I can pinpoint all the components, you're probably going to miss some opportunities to test and evaluate, and then adapt. And then I think that's the key part about AI, is test and adapt and find what really works for your business, and not just bet everything on one big opportunity. There's probably lots of small opportunities where AI can add value.
Spot on. Absolutely spot on. I love to hear that, especially directly from a CFO. It correlates with our vision and how we see it on our side from a technology perspective. Let's talk about the broader world, though, as well. You have a lot of international experience, both working abroad. You have family, right? That's international, which is wonderful. I think you said your kids are bilingual, which is great. How has that experience shaped your approach to finance ultimately?
I did have a chance to work internationally in Norway when I was in college, and then with Price Waterhouse in the Czech Republic. And it was early in my career. And I think those were kind of formative years, as they are for most people. And I think what it gave me a perspective on is, there's not always one right way, right? You go into a different culture, they approach even accounting standards in a different way. I think it's opened my mind to appreciate different perspectives, and to know that my view may not always be right. And then, just from a personal standpoint, I think it's important to have a worldview, right? And that's why I think raising our kids bilingual and binational, they recognize that, yeah, I think America is a great place to live, but it's not the only place in the world where there's great people, and they enjoy traveling as I do, and my wife as well. And the more of the world you see, I think the better you actually appreciate what we have in the United States. And so that's my view on my international experience, and I'm glad I've had it. And I met my wife in the Czech Republic, and we're celebrating 28 years
Wow.
of marriage. And we try to get back to Europe every summer and just bask in a different perspective. The life there is very different than the United States, and it doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just different, and it's nice to see those things.
Absolutely. The beauty's in the difference, absolutely, from a cultural perspective and also from a finance perspective. The way finance works in the United States does not correlate to the way it works in the other regions. It's important to understand that and the intricacies therein. Obviously, something that I'm very fortunate as well, right, to have that perspective, having worked with U.S. companies and Singapore companies and so on. But going into your family a little bit, we talked about fitness before, that you've prioritized that, right, in terms of like your work, but your fitness, your health also comes first. Why is that for you? Why do you kind of take that outlook to start?
Maybe like a lot of finance people, I've been a workaholic, right? I like what I do and I enjoy it. And as a result, I probably have not always had the right personal and professional balance in my life. Back in 2020 during COVID, my wife was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And through some, really tremendous healthcare, she survived. She had a 1% chance, and she survived. And she's always been healthy, but she really refocused on being healthy, and that really inspired me to put that part of my life back in the forefront. And so, I start every day with a workout, sometimes short, sometimes long, and certainly weekends, a bit longer when I have more time. But I think it's helped me to be more balanced. I start the day fresh. I'm not waking up and then walking right into my office. I work from home. And, so I'm always having a couple of hours before I even start my work to kind of clear my head and think about my priorities. And I'll be working out and sending text messages or even just writing notes to myself. And I found that's really reinvigorated, my perspective on work, where I think people say that I have a very high level of energy. And I think it just comes from being more focused on the mind and the body.
Wonderful. Beautiful. Your workout of choice, you a runner, jiu-jitsu?
Oh, no. Certainly I do some of that, but it's much more high intensity workouts and weight training. Every day I have a workout. It's already planned, and I kind of repeat certain workouts, and I track my time. I got my Apple Watch to track my calories, and just to kind of just set an expectation of, getting better. I'm not looking to go compete in any kind of fitness, but I definitely feel like my metabolic age is substantially less than my actual age. That's a good indication that I'm doing some things right on the nutrition and the fitness. And I would just encourage everybody that if you're not prioritizing that part of your life, that if you did spend more time, and it's hard to find that time, especially if you have a young family, it will pay significant dividends in your career.
Yeah, for sure. Interesting on the Apple Watch thing. Everybody's got their own little device of sorts, right? But it all comes down to data, especially for us finance people, right? And I remember we were talking to somebody on this podcast a while back, and we were talking about how these things kind of track the balance sheet and income statement of our bodies at the end of the day, right? When you think about it.
That's right. I have a special weight. It's called Hume, and it basically is like an InBody, where it gives me a body composition, body fat and lean muscle mass, et cetera. And it's really more of just trending, but like in finance, right? You trend data, and, no data point is necessarily right or wrong. It's just, how does it compare to where you've been in the past? And that's how I look at it. It helps me to kind of, manage some of those health metrics, which I probably never looked at in my life until I had that device.
For sure. They're incredible in terms of the sophistication and how those things are evolving from a technology perspective. As a nerd, that is, they're cool to see.
Yeah. Very affordable these days, right? Yeah. It's accessible if you look for it.
Yeah. A couple $100.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to our kind of like rapid fire, kind of take a minute or so per question here. What is your one finance rule that you've encountered that doesn't work anymore?
I think people say cash is king, right? And I still think cash is, terribly important. But as a finance professional, data, right? Data is extremely important. How do you compile that data? How do you use the data to drive business? And I think any finance professional who's not almost putting on an IT hat along with their finance hat, they're missing an opportunity to really leverage the business. In our organization, we're using Power BI and other tools to try to highlight the underlying trends in our data. And sometimes it's amazing the kind of things that we're finding out about our business that we were not thinking about. And it's just because we're compiling the data and analyzing in a way that we never did before.
Yep. Awesome. What advice would you give to someone listening that's analyst, entry level? They're aspiring one day to be a CFO. What advice do you give them?
Think like an owner, What that means, I think, in a very practical terms is if you're working with a operator, understand what the operator is trying to accomplish. That person's trying to grow their top line, manage the bottom line to hit a target. Put yourself in their seat, right? They're an owner of a business. Put yourself in that seat and think about how they could be better with what you can offer, right? I oftentimes tell finance folks that when they think about a variance analysis, which is something almost every finance organization does, it's the what. Okay, so revenue's up, and they might even get to the point of the why, right? Like, why is revenue up, right? But so many times they stop there. And what I try to push our finance organization is, what do I do about it, right? Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? If it's a good thing, how can I make it better? And if it's an unfavorable variance, what are some of the things I should be thinking about as an owner? And so it all comes back to, if you think like an owner, you're going to act like an owner, and you're going to help others think like owners.
Love it. I'll put you on the spot here for this one. Let's say you're the CFO in the year 2035. You're hiring for a treasurer. What's the job description for a treasurer look like in that year?
Wow, that's interesting. I think, depending upon the company, it could be somebody who has multi-currency experience, probably somebody who has experience with Bitcoin and those kind of alternative currencies, somebody who is very IT literate. Their team is probably going to be very small because AI and other software applications have automated a lot of things that may be being done today in a more manual sense or in larger teams. And I think probably more strategic. They're not just about moving money around and managing interest rate risk and such like that. I think there's like, how do they use the cash in a strategic way? And how do they make sure that they're understanding what's happening in the business, and when is the business going to need that extra capital, and planning for it in advance?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, at the end of the day, what treasurers do today is they kind of control and have the compliance in terms of the money movement and centralization of that. And that will endure. The endpoints, though, are different, right? Like you said, you're going to have a balance of human and agents kind of working collaboratively together, but you're still the one who's going to control that compliance and policy, that foundation, even if it's a human doing it or if it's the agent ultimately doing it. Because ultimately there will be obviously a lot of agent type work being done in our future world here, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Last one. What's your favorite city and where to eat when you're there?
Well, my wife might shoot me if I didn't say Prague.
I was going to say, you better say Prague.
I was there just a few years after what they called the Velvet Revolution, which took place in 1989, when they kind of broke away from the Soviet Union in the Eastern Bloc. I came to work there in 94, so it was still early on. And it's fabulous to see how the Czech Republic, and particularly Prague, has changed over the last 20 plus years. There's so many places I love to go eat there. But what's interesting today that's very different than when I lived there is the options. There's an Argentine beef place that we love to go to that 20 years ago you did not have. Asian food, where it's more fusion Asian than at the time you could get Vietnamese or maybe Chinese, just given the history of the Vietnamese. There are definitely Vietnamese living in the Czech Republic. So that's what I like is the variety. It's still very affordable. It's certainly more expensive than 20 years ago, but it's a very affordable place. And for people who have made it to Europe but not to Prague, I definitely encourage you to go see it. People are very friendly, very welcoming of Americans. And when I lived there, was over 50,000 Americans living in Prague at that time. Today, probably not so many, right? There was a lot of expats at the time as I was, but a great place to visit. And I do love going there every summer.
It's awesome. The dozens of countries I've been to, it's still not one I've been to. And I have lineage there and great-grandfather from there. And I do need to go. I've heard nothing but good things. Heard it's a great spot to go with your family, with your friends, young and old. I've heard nothing but good things about Prague. Got to go one day. Thanks, David. This was engaging. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate you joining. And thanks to everybody who was listening here. To never miss an episode, please subscribe wherever you listen. I'm Tom Gavaghan, and this is Liquid, how CFOs outperform.